Okay. This week we're going to begin chapter 7, and we're switching gears here. We finished talking about infancy, which is birth to 2 years. Now we're stepping up a developmental level, sorry, and we're going to talk about kids 2 to 6, and that is considered early childhood. Um, Also known as the preschool years. Now, during early childhood, we see a slowdown in growth, and we're going to look at growth patterns here in a minute. We see a slowdown in growth when compared to infancy. They become taller and leaner, and by the end of this part, they look more like mini adults than they do infants. Some other things that happen: motor skills develop over this time. They become stronger, they become faster, they're better coordinated, language improves, carry on conversations, they can play pretend, eager to learn. So overall, increased physical and cognitive capabilities, which in turn leads them to be more independent. Now, as far as actual physical growth, we know this slows during the preschool years. Girls and boys, on average, gain about 2 to 3 inches every year. And obviously this can come in spurts. And some, variations are going to happen from child to child, but typically their weight regain remains fairly even. Their weight gain from about 4 to 6 pounds a year. Children become more slender, start to lose, I think, what we call some of that babyishness, that baby fat. Boys do become slightly taller and heavier than girls. And if we look at the following charts, you can see some charts for boys and girls, both in weight and in height in inches. And you can see their age in years here from 2 to 6, so during that period. And if you look real closely, you can see boys are in blue and girls are in red, where the different percentiles are, so that they're, where the average is at the 50th, a little below average at the 25th and 3rd, and above average at the 75th and 90th. So you can see, on average, looking at that 50th percentile is where you would kind of find that middle ground. Now, other things that develop physically, not only our height and weight, but our brain. Our brain develops and changes, obviously, during this period, too. Now, more quickly than any other organ during childhood, the brain is going to develop. If we look at it compared to how big it actually is size-wise, at 2 years, for comparison, the brain is 75% of an adult weight brain. And at 5 years, we're not quite done yet with this period of early childhood, but even at 5 years, the brain is 90% of its adult weight. Now, this increase in brain size is due to what's called the myelination of nerve fibers. So remember we talked about that myelin sheath? That myelin sheath is starting to really develop and cover those neurons. And when that myelination process is complete, it helps with fine motor skills, it helps with balance, it helps with coordination. Some other things that we want to look at when it comes to brain development is visual skills. The development of the brain improves our visual processing of information. It helps us, therefore, to learn to read. It helps us to pay attention. It helps us screen out things that may have distracted us before. Once we become about 4 to 7, that myelination increases even more, and so we can focus on things like schoolwork, so preschool, and kindergarten, those sorts of things. Visual processing speed and improves and reaches adult levels at adolescence, so a few years later. Something we also want to look at is the development of the right and the left hemispheres. Now, there has been some talk of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere doing different things for us. And that is true to an extent. The left hemisphere is more involved in intellectual kinds of things, language, logical things, problem solving, where the right hemisphere is usually better at visual spatial things like putting puzzles together, recognizing faces, finding things more aesthetically pleasing, and more emotional, creative kinds of endeavors. However, that doesn't mean we're necessarily right-brained or left-brained. Remember that corpus callosum that attaches the two hemispheres really helps those hemispheres to talk, and at any one, or to talk to one another. And at any one time, they are cooperating in terms of what the brain is processing, what it's understanding it, how it's understanding it. So it's never just the right brain at work by itself or the left brain at work by itself. That corpus callosum really does help the two hemispheres work in tandem and work together. Now, one of the things we want to talk about when it comes to brain development is to plasticity. And when we're younger, our brain plasticity is at its highest. And plasticity is the ability to compensate for injuries in particular parts of the brain. So it is going to be the greatest at ages 1 to 2 years. So if a preschooler, say, suffers damage to part of their brain, say like the language area of their brain, which is in the left hemisphere, they're going to be able to overcome that because of the plasticity of the brain, the rest of the brain kind of taking charge and taking over for the area that's been damaged, as opposed to adults, because we don't have that kind of plasticity that we did when we were in preschool or when we were age 1 to 2. Our brain isn't able to as easily take over other areas of the brain, take over those responsibilities, and therefore we may lose some language abilities, either to be able to speak or to understand language. So plasticity is important, and it is greatest when we are younger.